Thank you so much. What an honor to be here. I want to first wish all of you good health and also the opportunity to stay at home and also be vigilant as we all brace together to fight this pandemic globally. I would have loved to be in ZheJiang together with you. Unfortunately, we are having a lockdown. I'm calling in from Washington, D.C. in United States right now. So we're adjusting to the new world of working remotely and connecting around the world with technology. So thank you very much for giving me a chance to share with you some of the experience going through the technology realms of how do we apply tech for FinTech, SMEs, and women empowerment. Today, I'm going to share with you mostly from my experience and my own point of view and not representing my organization. So next slide, please. I want to start with giving you some numbers as a backdrop. COVID-19 pandemic is having a disastrous impact in every aspect of the global economy. However, it is very likely that the pandemic will have a disproportionate effect on small, medium enterprises around the world. And these numbers are a little old from 2016, and this is pre-COVID-19. As you know, SME represent about between 60 to 70% of GDP for most countries around the world, and more than 90% of employment. An SME in emerging and developed economies will suffer greatly during the crisis. Although a little outdated, this chart shows the average cash buffer that small businesses have across different sectors. On average, small businesses have less than 1 month of cash buffer before they have to go to the banks to borrow. As would be expected, the sectors with the lowest cash buffers are restaurants, retail, construction, personal services such as hair salons, massages, etc. Business with the highest cash buffers are usually real estate and high-tech services. Now, according to a more recent report by MetLife and the US Chamber of Commerce, 1/4 of small businesses have already temporarily shut down in US. What is more striking is that 54% of the small businesses indicated in the survey that they are closed or could close within the coming weeks or months. So most business owners have limited runway to survive. 51% of the survey respondents say that the business will not be able to weather the storm easily for the coming months. And to make ends meet, the business owners are seeking financial assistance in a form of direct cash payments, disaster loans, and the temporary cancellation of business payroll taxes. SMEs are also seeking more guidance on how to keep their customers and employees safe and how to respond to the crisis, how to understand the outbreak better with real-time information. And governments around the world are focusing on how do they pump in enough money to create stimulus in order to address the liquidity problems in the near future. So next, please. As you can see, if you can go on to the next slide, please. What I'm going to show you in the next slide, if we can move forward, is the access to finance for micro and small medium enterprises. It looks like the screen is frozen. If there's a way for you to move the screen forward. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think the screen is frozen. Is it going to the next slide? While I'm sure folks are adjusting, let me continue. The next slide I'm going to share with you is more around some of the more numbers on the COVID-19. This is actually also pre-COVID-19. The access to finance for micro, small, and medium-sized businesses is a global, major global barrier for the growth and development. FinTech is proving to be a key enabler to provide financing for micro, small, medium enterprises. the second slide. Keep going back, please. Looks like there's some little bit of coordination. Back a few more. Yeah, right there. Thank you. So, so what you can see here is that these are the estimates from IFC and World Bank that financing gap for MSME globally, it is a whopping $5.3 trillion. And this is, mind you, before COVID-19. This amount represents close to 70% of the total financing demand in a particular country. When looking at the breakdown of the $5 trillion SME financing gap, the majority is in East Asia Pacific, followed by Latin America and Caribbean. From a gender perspective, $1.7 trillion out of the $5 trillion financing gap is attributed to women-owned small medium enterprises. By closing the $5 trillion gap, this could lead to greater creation of jobs for 39 million new jobs for SME by 2030. So the question then is, if you go to the next slide, please, what are the barriers for SME in for development? So the main question is, why is it such a huge financing gap for SME? Well, there are many different factors which can be divided into two categories, on the demand side and the supply side. From a demand side, the SME perspective, there are some of the few important ones are lack of credit history, because SME do not have financial statement data available readily if they're not digitized, and high transaction costs of traditional loans, as well as high interest, since these customers are viewed as high risk for the banks to give them loans. And also low business and financial literacy in some cases. On the supply side, for the bank's perspective, to give them loans, there are high costs to serve relative to the revenue potential. And it's difficult to reach since they may be also spread in rural community and therefore high risk. So as you can see, these are already some of the existing barriers. Now go to the next slide, please. When you start layering the COVID-19 impact to SMEs, and starting from the FinTech angle on payment and international remittance, digital financial products are playing a crucial role to help SME during this pandemic. Digital payment, as you're so familiar in China with WeChat and Alipay, it's one of the main products which are seeing a tremendous increase in usage around the world. Digital payments serve as a foundation to provide other financial products such as digital loans and insurance. The payments made digitally create a digital footprint of transaction that can be used to evaluate the credit risk of small medium enterprises. And the remittance is a major area in emerging countries. World Bank estimates that remittance volume was more than 700 billion in 2019. This amount surpassed foreign direct investment in emerging markets. And remittance represent a significant portion of the GDP for a lot of emerging market countries in Asia and many parts of the world. For example, Philippines is about 10% of the GDP. Most of the remittance are done using cash, which, as you can imagine, it represents an issue during the pandemic because of the contact between people and the paper. Also, the cost of sending remittances can be quite high, as much as 7 to 10% of the total amount sent. As the amount of cash and cash-based payment services are being greatly reduced, we are seeing more use of digital payments, even in remittance around the world. However, the remittance market is expected to be greatly affected because, based on World Bank estimates, there is a huge impact due to the fact that many of the jobs are lost, and therefore the payment that will be moved back home is a lot more reduced as a result of that. And to address these issues, the digital forms of remittance could be a big increase, such as WorldRemit, TransferWise, and others for international cross-border remittance. Another way is for government to make remittance services as an essential service to create a greater usage of digital platform. So now that we see kind of an overall framing based on the numbers around the world from macroeconomics, let's go to Bank of England on the next slide. I want to share with you some of the reports. This was a report from Bank of England that was published in 2019 on open data platform for SMEs. Is now that we understand some of the challenges, even before COVID-19, what are the central banks thinking in terms of how do we address this space? The report described how the economy is becoming increasing digital, with every transaction adding to an even greater digital trails of data that's collected. And they explain how the financial system is beginning to harness the data using the latest technology to deliver more tailored services and better pricing for their end customers. Bank of England response showed that identified priority areas where it could be of great impact. One of these was to develop an open platform to boost access to finance for small businesses up and across the country, inspired by open banking. It proposed a vision to how to open data access across the entire economy, which could ease frictions in the financial system, in particular, that can close about $22 billion of funding gap for small medium enterprises across UK alone. And the open data platform would in practice be a decentralized network of data providers using a standardized set of APIs, application programmable interface, to move data around the financial system instantly at the request of the small medium enterprise. And no data will be moved without permission of the SME. There will be no central repository of physical credit files, and there would be a way of helping create that kind of interoperability and protocol that will facilitate more FinTech to be part of the ecosystem. So if you go to the next slide, this permission data sharing standards could deliver an open data platform and a portable credit file that makes it easier for SME to apply for credit and improves transparency for lenders. And open banking has successfully demonstrated that with the right permissions, sensitive financial data can be stored securely with third-party providers using API. And at the same time, fintechs have demonstrated their ability to use real-time data from online marketplaces, for example, to expand the information to set and make better and more inclusive short-term lending decisions, and focusing on a few key areas like identity verification, data and messaging standards, platform integrity, and governance. So next slide, please. Let's have a look at Singapore, my birth country. And this is where I actually work on some of these programs when I was in Singapore for 3 years. The SME Go Digital program that started by the government. It focuses on digitalization benefits of small medium enterprise, unlocking value add and productivity, such as e-payments, e-commerce, software as a service, Internet of Things, data analytics, and artificial intelligence. And all these is because of Singapore's vision to create a digital economy blueprint. As you can see on the left-hand side, it shows the layers of enablers and also strategic priority to achieve that vision of Singapore as a leading digital economy, which continually reinventing itself. And that becomes a very important factor in today's world. Next slide, please. The Monetary Authority of Singapore, the central bank, initiated a program in 2018 called the Business Sans Border. What this program is with other government agency called the Infocom Media Development Authority, are partnering together with 6 private sector partners to create a proof of concept, hybrid business data, and digital solutions hub. The initiative will leverage, or have already leverages, artificial intelligence to facilitate the internationalization and digitalization of small medium enterprises. Private sector partners such as Global Linker, MasterCard, SAP, Yellow Pages, DBS, and Singtel. These are a few of the private partners together with government to form this collaboration. In the next slide, please. You will start seeing that why all that matters. So Singapore continued to focus on digital platform And for COVID-19, the government responded with multiple packages for stimulus. This is the actual website of supporting the businesses on digital platform. I think is a remarkable way of continuing that journey of digital transformation for the business, for SMEs, and continue that path forward. And the COVID-19 pandemic has massively transformed and create disruptions globally in agribusiness, healthcare, manufacturing, textile, logistics sectors, and many more. As social distancing and quarantines becomes one of the main ways to fight the spread of the virus, sectors such as airline, tourism, services, hospitality, and retail sector have come to a screeching halt. And governments around the world are responding with tax concessions, stimulus packages, and credit support to boost the economy. And then from a monetary policy side, central banks are cutting interest rates almost down to zero and lowering the reserve requirements for banks. So these are different measures, but Singapore being one of the examples I quote, and US has already gone through two schemes. The first schemes was $310 billion for US dollars for the stimulus, and $350 billion for the first package, and the second scheme was $310 billion for the SME community. And the next slide, please. So when we start thinking about what does it mean when for technology, I want to bring your attention to trade trust. So trade trust is a tech innovation in Singapore using blockchain for supply chain. And the pilot of this blockchain project is with Maritime, aimed at cutting container ships' waiting time and fraud risk. Singapore, as you know, is a huge trading port, and it has been an important part of the government agenda for digitalization, and also a way to look into technology like blockchain to disrupt and create opportunity and cost savings in the maritime sector. So it was announced on March 4th, 2019, and if you can see the timeline, in the government, together with several other governments in Port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands, to work together on this transfer capability in terms of electronic bill of ladings for trade and digital cross-border transaction. And this alignment achieve through the workshop opportunity for invaluable learnings for tighter transfer capability using this platform. On March 31st this year in 2020, a successful proof of concept was executed by representatives from the Singapore government, Port of MPA, as well as the Port of Rotterdam, where simulated transactions were carried out to transfer the electronic bill of ladings from shipper in Rotterdam to a consignee of shipments to Singapore and vice versa. The results from this trial further demonstrated that electronic bill of lading could soon become an interoperable electronic framework based on international accepted standards. Next, please. This solution is actually not just a technology, but a policy innovation. The system would digitize the paper-based lading bills, making it shareable and accessible from both countries. And this become an important way of cutting the administration costs and also making it possible to get real-time information. The Singapore government planned to introduce changes to the Electronic Transactions Act to recognize digital bills of ladings as one of the most important documents in global trade. It is also evident in this example that you could take it forward in 4 key areas: legal harmonization, standards development, accreditation structure, and open source software. And the outcome of this is to increase efficiency through uncertainty and also transparency, reducing costs because of digitization and reducing paper documentation, and the support of new services offerings to drive interoperability with high visibility and control. The next example, after going through all the cities and urbanization, if you go to the next slide, please, is the World Bank example on agri-tech. So my colleagues have recently published this paper that talks about many of the digital technology that are used in agriculture sector can be deployed in low connectivity and rural environments. The digital agriculture technology operate across a continuum from low internet penetration and mobile connectivity to high digital connectivity. Most of African countries have intermediate level of mobile and internet penetration. However, digital accessibility is much lower in rural areas and varies greatly according to age, gender, and income. As such, reaching all African farmers and disruptive agriculture technologies will require a range of tools that can operate in different connectivity scenarios, even within the country. Um, and these kind of creative solution that would then be able to give farmers ability to do soil testing, using short message services for them to access education tools and videos over 5G, interactive voice recordings, and offline functionality that they can then use to connect with the main systems for various forms of information sharing and getting real-time data that will address some of the information asymmetry for the farmers. This was one of the projects that was initiated in Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria. And Kenya is a leading agri-tech hub with approximately 60 scalable digital agriculture technology operating in the country. And it is a great story of creating inclusion and opportunity for the farmers. The next slide, please. Here's where Microsoft showcase the FarmBeats innovation that combines a lot of different technologies such as cloud, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence. And several studies have shown that the need to significantly increase the world's food production by 2050 is important. However, there's a limited amount of additional land and water level that could be used effectively. And so using this approach as data-driven farming, they're able to empower the farmers to have knowledge and also drive greater control over the crop yield and reducing costs. This is an extremely important part of leveraging technology, low-cost sensors, drones, and various forms of geospatial imaging and machine learning algorithm to empower the farmer to have better control over precision farming. Next, please. I talk at great length of all these interesting technology, but then there is also a huge gender lens when it comes to COVID-19. My colleague, Karen Groen, who's a senior director for gender at World Bank, shared this slide recently in a seminar that talks about the gender dimension of COVID-19. And here's a breakdown of the key areas that compare COVID-19 impact of women and men. What we are experiencing is both the supply shock in many ways and also the demand shock. So from a supply side, you can see that when the pandemic was in China as epicenter, you could not get the goods delivered out of China easily. And now there's a low demand because of the lockdown in many countries. Without any demands for these products and goods, it makes it hard to sustain the business without significant reduction in costs. That requires some drastic measures such as laying off of the workers. That's the reason why you see such high unemployment numbers around the world. At home, women are usually the caregiver for the elderly and young children. Women are more exposed as frontline workers in healthcare, grocery store, food stands that are deemed as essential to keep the economy going even during the lockdown. In developing countries, women are also very much active in the informal economy. And this lockdown and work from home is hard on the informal economy, where there's 1.6 billion people who are impacted globally. And it frequently leads to insolvency, resulting in liquidity challenges at the firm level. So what are some of the solutions that are out there? My last slide, please, talks about one example in China. You might be familiar with Pinduoduo. This is where it's a very heartwarming story. We recently invited our friends from Pinduoduo to present at the World Bank webinar to talk about technology and women empowerment. China has the world's highest e-commerce penetration. However, for agriculture products, e-commerce penetration is still just the low single digits, and many farmers in China are still living below the poverty line. There is something that Pinduoduo can do. As the second largest e-commerce platform in China by several users, it can pose significant opportunity for the farmers. So what they have done is they work with farmers and local government to digitize and modernize the agriculture industry. And in so doing, helping to enable close to $20 billion in agriculture products sales in 2019 alone, benefiting 12 million farmers across China. This is according to Pinduoduo's numbers. And they also initiated the Duoduo Farms initiative, where they have partnered with provincial government to develop pilot programs for farms that adopt financial, agronomic, and also technological innovations to improve farm productivity and raise farmer income. The goal is to develop sustainable models that can be replicated across more impoverished counties across China. And you can check out the latest Y Combinator blog about Pinduoduo's contribution and the rise of social e-commerce. And lastly, I will conclude by saying I was recently impressed and inspired by Harvard Business Review article, how hard times bring out the best in people. In every moment of darkness, it seems there are countless moments of light and small gestures of compassion and connection that allow people to show who they are, how they want to live, and what matters to them. I thank you very much for the opportunity to share these experiences and examples with you today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for your inspiring and wonderful keynote speech. So let's give her a big round of applause, please. Thank you for your job. And it's very inspiring. And I see that a lot of panelists, and I also guess that the people who are online are enjoying your keynote speech very much. So our panelists, our distinguished guests today, they will have some questions to ask you. Okay, Leslie? And then first, they prepared some questions for you. And also after hearing your speech, they might have some new ideas. First, let's turn to Dr. Ben Shenling. Yeah, do you have any question for Leslie?
Yes, of course, a lot. Okay. But
okay.
And
so
lastly,
you first.
Wonderful presentation. I was really, impressed with a few of the keywords that I could take away. You talked about obviously the SMEs, the gender, especially, like women's side, which are dear to your heart, I know. But you are a big believer in technology, how technology, can solve or at least mitigate some of the problems that we are facing today. And thank you for using the example of your home country, Singapore, because Singapore is a real leader in digital economy and in international commerce. You also used, I think I like the example like trade trust. I think trust is at the heart of everything. And trade trust is not just about technology, the DLT, the distributed ledger technology, but it's also about the governance, about standards, about legal harmonization. So I think this is actually very good. I was really, really happy about the ecosystem, the terminology they used, because indeed it takes an ecosystem to solve some of the problems. And more importantly, you actually talked about the digital agriculture. You moved away from developed country between Netherlands, Rotterdam, and Singapore, but you cared a lot more about developing countries in Kenya and also in China, in rural China. And thank you for using the example of Pinduoduo. Pinduoduo's founder is an alumnus of ZheJiang University. Okay.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And you also mentioned Ant Financial, Alibaba, Ant Financial CEO is an alumnus of ZheJiang University. And he's also pretty much a professor of practice at ZheJiang University International Business School. So I really, really enjoyed your presentation. as ZheJiang mentioned, ZheJiang is a hub of global digital economy, as well as FinTech. ZheJiang University International Business School, as well as the Academy of Internet Finance that I represent, have done a lot of work. Like AIF, we have been just celebrating the 5th anniversary. Being one of the leading think tanks and research platforms. So I just thought it was, it was just very good. And for China, and obviously COVID-19, the impact was very, very serious, back in January and February. But looking back with the benefit of hindsight, I must say, because of the digital platforms that we had in place already, the government, the business, as well as the general public were able to leverage the digital platforms, the Alipay, the WeChat, the things that you have mentioned, so that we were able to survive to a certain extent, the pandemic in a way, otherwise we could have suffered even more. So I like also the way you mentioned about the access to finance is the key barrier to SME. As you know, that as a finance professor, we always talk about 3 A's related to finance. That means the access, the accessibility, availability, but also the affordability. That means the cost side. And it takes the technology sometimes to solve some of the problems that we have. I am pleased to share with you that, my bank, which is part of Alibaba and Ant Financial, WeBank, which is a digital-only bank, owned by Tencent in China, they are doing a lot of wonderful things. They are solving, or at least mitigating, a lot of the problems about the availability, accessibility, and affordability. So that's kind of like a financial revolution and a technology revolution that you are seeing from, how the technology is enabling some of the smaller businesses, the women's side, for the availability. So it's becoming more inclusive development. And from a finance perspective, we call it inclusive finance. And I think China, thanks to technology and many other things, that we are becoming a leader in terms of financial inclusion, okay? So that's just my key, takeaways from yours, and I thank you for that. I have a couple of small questions that I hope you don't mind. And the COVID-19, so the short-term impact so far, from what I can observe, seems a bit asymmetric. That means it affects companies in different ways, sometimes even in different directions. Some businesses actually have benefited from that. So what are the key, differences between this divergence of the impact on the, say, smaller businesses, and what are the potential longer term implications for the economy and for the business in general?
Well, thank you so much, Professor Van. I've always been so honored to be in your presence and your wisdom from all your years of experience in financial services and now in education. So you have been a great role model for me as well. So from the longer term implication, I think I mentioned in the short term, the SMEs that are able to embrace digital technology are in a better state to build resilience, and because they're able to shift from offline to an online presence and continue that business going forward, there's less chance of job loss. But in the long term, it is hard to predict because this is the first of a kind that I can even recall in terms of the scale and also the depth of impact around the world. And we're living through it right now as the story unfolds, right? And how it's affecting different countries in different stages. Obviously, China has gone through it furthest along, and we're learning from China right now. Singapore is going through it, and Singapore is having a second wave. So I think there are, well, the foreseeable future is just going to be painful. because of the massive unemployment in the economy. And in some countries are still going to lockdown, like US. And so because of that, we are still not sure how this is going to evolve over time, because I'm not an economist. But what I've read in the news is that, depending on how the government pump in the stimulus package quickly, not just having the stimulus package, but it has been in the hands of the SMEs in order to use that to drive high level of liquidity and keep the jobs and keep the lights on. Otherwise, it's really going to be a bumpy ride for many of them. And in some cases, many of them will end up being closed in no time, because they just don't have the liquidity to keep the business going. And so I think in the long run, I would say that we are all going to adjust to the new normal for all of us in every way, shape, or form. The digital part will be an important thing. If I were to predict what the future will look like, we will learn to adapt more and more to the digital platform, reducing paper usage, in-person interaction, because these are very costly, right? To have an actual branch for the banks, and also to use more digital signature. And then the ability to transact on e-commerce. As you can see, more shops are going to be, physical presence of the shops are going to be reduced, because it's really economically hard to sustain that over a long period of time. And then when they start shifting online, they realize they can make the same amount of money and the profit margin goes up, actually reducing the cost and overhead. So most of the SMEs will naturally gravitates towards that direction. And then more reliance on data and automation is my other prediction, that as you get more used to it, more data will be funneled into the system, and then you're better at data literacy, and then using that data to give you real-time information and access to your own portfolio, and being able to adjust those crises in a more effective way to build resilience for future pandemic. I think that's what I can foresee, right? But of course, history will tell.
Thank you, Leslie.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question, Dr. Ben, and thank you for your answer, Leslie. And next, we will turn to Mr. Yang Rui. Hello, Mr. Yang Rui, are you there? Yeah? Can you hear me? Okay, some problems with the network. So first we'll come to, next we'll come to Dr. Chen Hongyi, okay?
Sure.
So Chen Hong, okay, Chen Hongyi. So you go first, and after your question, we'll turn to Mr. Yang, okay?
Okay, thank you very much.
I saw you write something when hearing Leslie's speech.
Yeah.
So what kind of things did you write down? What kind of ideas did you come to your mind when hearing her speech?
Right. So thank you very much for Leslie to show some of the potential solution in terms of how could we respond for potential issue that that are arising. So my question is because now, as Leslie, you know, now I'm leading the Master of Finance program at ZheJiang University, and I interview lots of students. I teach students. So I think one of the key questions recently, students asked me a lot, and I think maybe that might be good to bring this as one of the questions to have your insight is FinTech innovation and the disruption are highly motivated by financial crisis in 2008. So as the world is changing and transforming due to COVID-19, what kind of opportunity and challenges do you envisage? I think that question probably might help our students to understand because obviously they are quite anxious about their future. So they also want to know maybe what kind of skill they should equip in that sense.
Well, I'm biased towards technology, right? So I would say that learn more of the technology, but also layer that with the business skills as well and multidisciplinary. But let me answer your first question, some of the tech innovation, because this is where I'm passionate about some of the innovation, especially as you know, going cashless is now becoming more and more fashionable, so to speak. Because of COVID-19, the use of cash is deemed as quite tricky for the contact. And so fintech that thrives and will continue doing well are the ones that go deeper into the digital payments, especially with government packages, with G2P, government to people, opportunities of using the QR code, mobile wallet. The other one is around the world, right? FinTech that are using digital channels to SMEs such as PayPal, Square, First Circle, just to name a few. Regulators are also making sure that these are now approved in some countries. So the challenge of FinTech is that many of them have not experienced bad times of this magnitude. As you can see, FinTech is probably in the last 10 years or so, 10 to 15 years. And this kind of magnitude is unprecedented. And we would still worry that how many of them will survive, right? As you can see in Singapore, the SME Go Digital program has really focused a lot on trying to get the FinTech off the ground and connecting them with banks and also many of the opportunity for them to grow the ecosystem, such as the Apex platform in Singapore, which is an initiative started by Central Bank, MAS, together with the private sector. I actually worked on it back in 2015, 2016 timeframe. And then now it has become an interesting platform that create opportunity for fintechs to partner with banks, not just in Singapore, but in the region. Last year in FinTech Festival, there was some really good example. For example, the Union Bank eye-to-eye platform for cross-border remittance on blockchain between OCBC and Singapore was a perfectly good use of examples of blockchain technology. And Global Linker, which is one of our partners and members of SME Finance, which is our IFC, our private arm of the World Bank, they have been advising these fintech startups to talk about digitalization. They currently serve 270,000 SME globally right now, and they're offering different solutions of online banking for SMEs, providing various creative solutions to help them withstand these kind of shock in the system. And of course, I recently wrote an opinion piece at The Banker and talk about a couple of good examples in Asia, Grab ride sharing, you know, how they're using their platform and the data and AI to create faster services for their riders, and also the and financials, as we all know, great examples of blockchain usage for contactless bidding in order to do remote access for SMEs in the bid opening system. So these are all examples that we are seeing and seeing how FinTech evolves in COVID-19 to strengthen the solution offering at lower cost and tapping upon different types of technology to help them. And then to answer your question around how for these graduate students or the students going through the COVID-19 right now, well, I would say digital skills, data skills, combining that with the business knowledge so that they can look at the problem holistically, not just a tech problem looking for a problem to solve, but truly understand the problem with empathy and look at the user, the end users of the system, so you can design the solution that has value, right? And then interdisciplinary skills that understand different sectors, whether it's FinTech and agriculture coming together, called RegTech as one example, right? And then building resilience in such hard times, having that growth mindset that I know it is harsh, but it is a point in time in their lives. They're still young. Life is a marathon. And therefore, this temporary moment in time may present hardship, but that's when they build resilience, right? 吃得苦中苦，方为人上人. That's our Chinese expression.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for Leslie's answer, and thank you for Dr. Chen Hongyi's questions. I think this question is very important for the graduating students because they might be a little bit puzzled about what kind of life are behind them, or sorry, are in front of them. So these kind of answers may help them to rebuild their knowledge and choose their own way. And next, we'll turn to Mr. Yang Rui. Hi, Mr. Yang Rui. It's your turn to ask question for Leslie, because before I know that before joining TMT, you were the host of the program Dialogue. Actually, this program has been witnessed the ups and downs of the economy and the society. You might have some questions in this area, and so it's your turn to ask question.
First of all, is my sound bite okay now?
Okay.
Yes.
We can hear you clearly.
Great, fantastic. Yes, indeed. My 2 decades of hosting Dialogue has become a journey of rediscovery. And this opportunity is also part of the learning curve for me, who have just boldly entered into the area of FinTech, and TMT Post looks exactly the issue of resilience and opportunities that the crisis might possibly bring to the younger generation. And you raised a very good point, that the young university graduates are seriously concerned about their future, whether they will be made redundant by the impact of COVID. I noticed 3 keywords in the very impressive keynote presentation by Leslie. 3 keywords: COVID, cash, and confidence. No one could underestimate the negative impact of COVID-19. We have all been traumatized by the nightmarish experiences, perhaps in 1 century, for several generations, and it takes time for us to recover from the aftershocks in years to come. Now, that doesn't mean people like us shouldn't look at the silver lining in the darkest clouds, and I'm so appreciative of Leslie Go's presentation, and particularly her focus on the impact, the profound impact on the disadvantaged groups. And I look at the impoverished population in the sub-Saharan region. For years, I'm concerned with the gap between the North and the South, and whether cooperation between countries in South-South relationship should be improved, or the other way around due to the digital gap. Now, by your mention of agri-tech and the increasing usage of digital technology, digital payment, online payment, the boom of e-commerce, I see and I feel we are not only cautiously optimistic. I think people like you, Leslie, armed with digital technology, are in a better position to use occasions like this to raise hopes and to build confidence. Having said that, I have 2 questions very quickly. First of all, the most disadvantaged and vulnerable group under the huge impact of COVID-19, the SMEs, or you may, if you like, you may call it micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, do you see, ironically, quote unquote, silver lining for this large group of the business community in China to enjoy a kind of a transformation in their traditional family-based business model, whether this is a wake-up call? Second question is, how do you assess impact upon women? We've been talking about staying at home, but what about working from home? And we always have a strong mixed feeling, and we share this feeling with women, ladies, about the chronic contradiction, the conflicting role between a career woman and a mother, wife and a mother. So do you think the rise of e-commerce is likely to provide this somehow disadvantaged social group with a big opportunity, so that we could level the playing field so that we see a growing equality between females and males. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Mr. Yang. I appreciate your question, and I've also seen you a wonderful history of these experience in public channels. I think from my humble opinion, I think we haven't really assessed how big of an impact it is for gender issues and gender balance. At this point, I've given some possible dimension of where the impact might be. It was just recently where I was chairing a session for Middle East, North Africa on a seminar where we invited Rima Aziz, who is the senior partner from McKinsey, to share with us the research findings. And she talked about the real change will only happen when women take ownership of the journey. And the key to empowering women is not only to equip them with access to jobs. In your case, you mentioned about online jobs and e-commerce, but also to ensure that they have the right support, experience, and opportunity once they are working. And she talked about the personal grit and supportive environments played a critical role for empowering of these women in times like this. Now, I also have to say that, it all depends, because women, like I mentioned, are sandwiched in, between the elderly parents and the young children. So it's not always easy, even if you could work from home. I have colleagues who are now working from home for the last 2 months since the lockdown in US, and they're attending conference calls, and they have young children where now they cannot put them in nursing, childcare. So the young kid will come to them when we're having a conference call, and you just have to accept the reality that there will be some disruption, some adaptation to work from home, right? But I do understand that e-commerce and now given women a chance to participate in the digital economy, and it's very empowering. For example, in China with the Taobao village, that is a wonderful example from Alibaba. My colleagues have shared a lot of interesting reports and firsthand experience of visiting these villages and seeing how women are now empowered to be part of the e-commerce when they previously could not. So I can see more of that happening. But in the short run, women are actually stretched in many ways at home as caretaker, but also in the front line as nurses, as people who are selling food in out there, and also being part of the informal economy. So I think in the short term, they will be quite significantly impacted disproportionately. But I think in the long run, with the support of men and women, we could empower more women to be part of the digital economy. I am hopeful of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie.
Maybe I can just add a couple of points. I think Yang Rui, that was a very, question which are really dear to my heart as well. But from my experience in terms of gender, I think technology is actually enabling and empowering people. It's actually not necessarily prejudicing the existent gaps or inequalities. In my university, for example, I come across a lot of best students who are women, first of all, Secondly, that, Yang Rui, you're laughing that in China, we talk about like half of the sky. I think the Chinese women, especially in the urban areas, when they have the access to education, when they have the opportunity to develop their digital skills and digital competence, they are doing better than some of their counterparts on the male side. Okay, so that's one of the things. So we shouldn't probably generalize that potential so-called inequality. And same can be said about SME, the potential impact on the SME. I just want to tell you that 17 years ago when SARS struck, there were some very small companies like SMEs who were struggling, just like many of the smaller companies today, they are struggling. Among them, like Alibaba was struggling as a SME. at that time. C-Trip was struggling as a SME, but they were able to embrace technology. They were able to, invest in it for a longer term in terms of connectivity and digital competence. Let's set them apart. And then when SARS was over, when consumers were embracing and migrating online for shopping, they benefit from that. So I think, as Leslie said, for every crisis, it is an opportunity. So whether you can seize it or not, at the country level, at the company level, or at the individual level. So I'm actually very positive. So for every of the crisis, that even how painful it is, we are going to end up with a better world, I believe. Okay, especially technology is a tool. But
ZheJiang, I'm so glad that you ring the big band. You ring the big band, and it's not just an alarm. It's something like a positive message about, for example, the success story of Alibaba, which rose on the ruins of SARS back in the year 2003. That's exactly the brilliant example illustrating the resilience of small and medium-sized enterprises. You have good reasons to feel proud and share the pride of being a person in ZheJiang or a professor in ZheJiang University. ZheJiang is a provisional Silicon Valley in China. It's perhaps a part of the world center for the resilience of the economy. So Alibaba is a very good example. C-Trip is yet another very positive derivative, adding to the excellence of those small enterprises that rose on the platform of digital technology. Thank you so much. That's indeed a very good point, Only.
So
sorry.
Yeah. Thank you for your two. So thank you for your question. First, thank you for Ms. Yang Rui, because you give 3 words of Leslie's speech and raised your question. And also Dr. Ben Shenli, you say that every strike is an opportunity. I totally agree with that. And also thank you for Leslie's answer. And also it's my turn to ask you a question, because you mentioned about women's empowerment. I have read about your personal experience, and it's really inspired me, because you go through a lot of ups and downs, and you get great success. But for a very ordinary woman, she might taking care of the family, as you have mentioned, taking care of the children. So she has a little bit time or limit time for the professional area. Although Dr. Ben Shenling has said that she has a lot of students who are women and have very good scores or very good remarks, but still I felt a little bit pressure when facing with different kind of things. So how will you balance that? And what kind of advice will you give to the professional woman to be more powerful in this social society, in this society?
Well,
that's
thank
my
you so
question.
much.
That's my emotional, personal question. Yeah, represent for all the women to ask you.
Thank you very much for this question, and also for doing some homework about my own journey. I am also a very simple person. I start with nothing. I've lived through so much of the hardship in my life, having been born out of wedlock, as you probably know. And so therefore, I had very little. I survived with very little when I was growing up. And but more importantly, during the years when I was an entrepreneur, I went through 3 economic downturns when I had my business for 15 years, from 1997 to 2011. And it was all about having a growth mindset, to focus on building resilience and redefining what failure means. See, I'm a perfectionist, even though I may not, I might have lived in US for a long time, but there's still that Asianness in me, that I felt that I must figure a way to avoid every mistake in life, because failure is not an option. I wanted to be the best of the best in many things that I do in school and in work and so forth. And I wanted to avoid failures because that was a traumatic experience for me. But then hardly do I know that it's through failures, and those are the toughest moments, and making mistakes is when I figure out, how do I get up on my feet, dust off my ego, wipe my tears, and carry on with my life. I made many fair shares of mistakes along the way. And as an entrepreneur, I failed in some areas, and I grow my business and survive 15 years and 3 downturns is not easy. But it's through those darkest moments that you find out who your friends are and to help you along the way. And I think it's also important to redefine what failure really means. So I was thrilled when Arianna Huffington talked about redefining failure and success. That failure is not the opposite of success. Women have a sense of perfection and want everything to be perfectly right and do not want to take a risk because there's a chance of not succeeding. So she said that women internalize stress differently, which lead to greater risk for health for women. And Oprah Winfrey voiced similar opinion and talked about failure is just life trying to move us in another direction. And you can think of failure as a stepping stone for success. So I think those are important way of changing the mindset, of building that resilience, adjusting to changing times. Those I think are important because through every setbacks is when you start thinking about how do you reinvent yourself? How do you think through life difficult moments and transform yourself? I've gone through being an entrepreneur, then joining Microsoft as a tech company, and then now at World Bank to scale out technology in developing countries and working in some areas where we have no internet connectivity easily. So how do you try to make the most of every stage in your life? It's not easy, I understand. But on the other hand, if we reach out to the other person to offer a helping hand, to show kindness to all around and show empathy, we can together, united as one humanity around the world to help each other through this pandemic. And I love this quote from Maya Angelou. When each time a woman stands up for herself, she stands up for all women. So I want to close with that remark that we can do it together, but we need all the men and women to help each other along the way. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
I think this
thank you very much for your.
Can I?
Mr. Yang Rui, okay, please.
This inspiring speech is a very good one for university students at a commencement. This is a moment of a rebirth, a reincarnation, and also redefinition for almost everything. Hope thrive on fears. That's what I always said to the young people, to my like-minded people. Just one small question. I wonder if you have time to address this very quickly, Leslie.
Okay.
Technology is always a double-edged sword. And when we talk about the impact, bad or good, of digital technology or the growing importance of FinTech, we look at something that may be easily ignored in our traditional culture, the protection of privacy. Now, one of the major reasons why Europeans find it difficult to adopt or opt for digital or online payment is that they are afraid fundamentally that their privacy might be violated by the command of big data. But in China, it seems a few people ask serious questions about what digital technology actually means for the decline in the quality of my life. And one of the key words in their vocabulary, before they realize it clearly, is the protection of their privacy. So do you think, the pervasive use of digital technology may somehow undermine our quality of life?
Very good question. In fact, this is a topic that I actually do a lot of work on, data governance, which covers data collection, data manipulation, data cleansing, data security, data privacy, and including cybersecurity. In fact, this year, our World Bank flagship report, World Development Report, it's going to have a lot of emphasis on that. The name of the report is Data for Better Lives. So I highly encourage you to check it out. We just posted a blog recently to encourage consultation from the public and sharing your thoughts. And eventually it will be published and finalized in October for our annual meeting. I personally have done a lot of work in this space. And in fact, Singapore, for Singapore contact tracing, using Bluetooth. This is an application for that is recently launched, and it talks about designing with data privacy in mind from the very beginning, and safeguarding privacy and ensuring that you have full control over your data. And the app does not collect data about your GPS, and so it's very mindful about that. So I'm very concerned about any misuse of data out there, because I think with digital technology, if you're not designing with all these in mind, there's a chance of creating biases, right, with AI in some cases, and there's also a chance of creating a greater digital divide in some cases. So I'm part of the groups of think tanks who are looking at it with different universities at Harvard and also at Cambridge, where I'm affiliated as a fellow, to look into this more deeply in terms of AI and ethics, and making sure that as we progress along the line of technology innovation, we do not leave behind the people who are most vulnerable, and that we always should design with those in mind to make sure that the new global norm take into consideration of making sure it's inclusive, making sure that citizens and consumers' rights are protected as they think through what are the trade-offs, and making sure that it's transparent and they can make the decisions as well. So I think this is more to be discussed. I'm sure we ran out of time, but you raised a very important question. And I encourage you to check out our World Bank Development Report this year, and continue having those kind of comments online, and collaborate together to mature this over time, so that we can all help each other understand what are the implications of data governance over time as we innovate in the space for digital economy. Thank you.
Shenglin, very quickly, don't you think it's a good idea to open a course of or on FinTech ethics or legislation in the International Business School of ZheJiang University? I think this is a very important a lecture to enlighten and educate young Chinese students about risks and risk assessment when we look at the prospects of using digital technology. Thank you very much.
Ray, that's a brilliant idea and a suggestion, and it would be great to have you to join us to help get the initiative off ground. Okay, we'll be absolutely delighted to have you. Yeah.
Okay. Seems to be a very interesting and inspiring question. So everyone has his own answer. Thank you for the additional question, Ms. Yang Rui, and thank you for Leslie's answer, and thank you again for Dr. Ben Shengling's additional answer. And before ending today's webinar, we will again invite Dr. Chen Hongyi to advance notice the next show, the next webinar, the time and the topic for all the web audience.
Okay, so again, I want to thank for Leslie and Ben and Yang Rui to join us today to bring your insight and to make today's webinar very engaging. So as you know, that we are forging a knowledge hub together and to disseminate this content for both of our students at ZheJiang University and general public as well. So please join us and follow us next Tuesday, 19th May at 6 p.m. Beijing time. We have pleasure to invite Mr. Richard Deng, who is the financial regulator at Abu Dhabi Global Market. So prior to join Abu Dhabi Global Market as the financial regulator, Richard was also the chief regulatory officer at the Singaporean exchange. So I hope that we can see you all next time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for your organizing work, Dr. Chen Hongyi. So thank you, Leslie, again for your wonderful speech and for your inspiring words and for joining us today. And thank you for Dr. Ben Shenling, Mr. Yang Rui, and Dr. Chen Hongyi. And thank you for all who are watching online. And so this is the end of today's webinar, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See you next Tuesday. Okay. Bye-bye.